Within 6 hours of Professor Kylock's initial report about Do-hyun shelter, the news had spread throughout every department of the Galactic University faculty. Members who had been teaching engineering for centuries were requesting emergency transport to Kepler 442b to see what the human student had accomplished. Professor Kylock floated in his office aboard the orbital station, reviewing holographic footage from all the student shelter sites. His other 23 students had done exactly what was expected. They had built functional, adequate survival shelters that would easily earn them passing grades and allow them to continue their studies kicks. The Zephyrian had created a perfect example of his species' efficient hexagonal design, Vorthak. The crystalline being had generated a beautiful energy dome that provided complete protection from the elements. Several other students had built creative variations on standard shelter designs, using techniques from their home worlds. All of them were good projects that demonstrated solid understanding of basic survival engineering principles. But the human student had done something completely different, something that was forcing the university to reconsider how they taught engineering. Priority communication alert chimed, and Dean Vorlich's image appeared on the holographic display. The Dean was an ancient being from the eternal archives whose crystalline form had been studying and teaching for over 2,000 years. His internal light was pulsing with what indicated extreme interest. "Professor Kylock, I have been reviewing the preliminary reports about your human student," Dean Vorlich said, without any greeting pleasantries. "This appears to be highly unusual." "That would be a significant understatement," Dean Professor Kylock replied. "The human has constructed what appears to be a permanent colony facility with capabilities that exceed most established research stations. Show me everything." Dean Vorlich commanded. The holographic display, filled with images, videos, and technical specifications from Do-hyun Complex. Dean Vorlich studied the architectural details, the engineering solutions, and the integration of multiple advanced systems. His crystalline form grew brighter as his interest increased. "Remarkable," the dean said. Finally, "Professor, this student has demonstrated mastery of concepts that we typically do not teach until graduate-level courses: advanced resource assessment, sustainable energy systems, defensive architecture, cultural integration, and long-term planning." How did he acquire these skills? Professor Kylock's tentacles writhed nervously. "I believe humans approach learning differently than most species. They seem to view assignments not as problems to be solved with minimum effort, but as opportunities to demonstrate maximum capability." The dean was quiet for several minutes, studying the technical specifications and construction details. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a tone of deep respect. "Professor Kylock, I am authorizing immediate faculty visits to this location. This represents a significant advancement in survival engineering methodology that could benefit students throughout the galaxy back on the planet's surface." Do-hyun was giving tours to an increasingly large group of visiting professors. Each department head was fascinated by different aspects of his construction. Professor Zelith from Advanced Engineering marveled at the geothermal power systems that could supply energy to a small-town professor. Andula from Architecture praised the way traditional design elements had been combined with modern functionality. The Cultural Studies Department was amazed by how Do-hyun had incorporated elements from his Earth heritage while adapting to an alien environment. Student Kim Professor Zelith asked, as steam rose from the geothermal vents, "What gave you the idea to build something so comprehensive when the assignment called for basic survival?" Do-hyun thought carefully before answering. "Professor, my grandfather once told me that if you are going to do something, you should do it properly. He said that good work honors both the creator and the people who will benefit from it. I did not want to just survive on this planet for 7 days. I wanted to create something that could help people thrive here for years." He gestured toward the complex. "When I looked at this valley, I saw more than just a place to build a temporary shelter. I saw the potential for something permanent. Something that could serve as a foundation for future research and exploration. Professor Kylox approached as other faculty members continued examining different systems throughout the facility. Student Kim, I must ask you directly, was this truly built according to the assignment parameters, or were you attempting to showcase human engineering capabilities? Do-hyun smiled and pulled out his original tablet. By day 4, Do-hyun had completed what could generously be called the foundation phase of his shelter. What he had actually built was an underground complex with multiple rooms, a sophisticated water management system, and a geothermal power plant that could supply energy to a small village. He paused his work to check in with Minji via communicator. "How's your shelter coming along?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Finished yesterday?" Minji's voice crackled through the device. "It's a lovely little dome with climate control and a small garden area. Very cozy. How about yours?" Do-hyun looked around at his construction site. Steam rose from several holes. Conveyor systems moved refined materials between different work areas, and the skeletal framework of what would become the above-ground structure stretched across the valley like the bones of some great beast. "Making good progress," he said diplomatically. Day 5. Do-hyun began construction on the main structure. Using principles of Korean traditional architecture combined with modern engineering, he built a complex that was both beautiful and incredibly sturdy. The main building featured thick walls designed to withstand extreme weather, with traditional, curved roof lines that would shed rain and snow efficiently. Day 6. Installation of the luxury features began. This included a full bathroom with hot and cold running water, a kitchen area with refrigeration systems powered by the geothermal plant, and a communications array that could contact ships in orbit. But Do-hyun's masterpiece was the shower system. Using the natural hot springs, he had created a bathroom that would have been comfortable in any high-end Earth hotel. Multiple shower heads, temperature controls, and even a small soaking tub carved from local stone. As he tested the water pressure and temperature controls, Do-hyun couldn't help but smile. His grandfather would have approved. Across the planet, other students were completing their final safety checks. Kix had successfully sealed his hexagonal pod and was running atmospheric tests. Vorthak's energy dome pulsed with a healthy blue glow. Everyone was ready for the final evaluation, everyone except Do-hyun, who was still installing decorative lighting in his great hall. Professor Kylox reviewed the final construction reports with growing bewilderment. Every other student had built exactly what was requested: a functional survival shelter. The human student had apparently built something that the computer classified as a defensive installation with residential capabilities. "Computer, prepare to visit the human's construction site," Kylox commanded. "This requires personal inspection." Do-hyun woke up before dawn on his first full day on planet Kepler 442b. The alien sun was just beginning to rise over the rocky cliffs that surrounded his valley, casting strange orange and purple shadows across the landscape. He had slept for only 4 hours, but he felt completely energized. Today would be the day he started building something that no one expected. While other students across the planet were probably still sleeping or just beginning their simple construction projects, Do-hyun was already working. He had learned long ago that the secret to completing big projects was to start early, work late, and never waste time. The first thing he did was something that none of his classmates would think to do. He began surveying his land like a professional engineer. His grandfather had taught him that you could not build anything properly without understanding the ground beneath it. Using his portable geological analyzer, Do-hyun took soil samples from dozens of locations around the valley. The machine beeped and hummed as it tested each sample for mineral content, density, water absorption, and structural stability. The results were even better than he had hoped. The valley floor was mostly limestone and granite, which would provide excellent foundation support. The soil near the stream was rich with iron ore that he could mine and smelt into building materials. Most importantly, his deep core samples confirmed what the orbital scans had suggested. The entire area sat above an active geothermal system with natural hot springs running through underground caverns about 15 meters below the surface. Perfect Do-Yun said again, marking the best locations on his digital map. This is going to work even better than I planned. By mid-morning, he had selected the ideal spot for his main structure. It was on slightly raised ground that would provide good drainage positioned to take advantage of natural wind patterns for cooling and directly above the strongest geothermal activity. Now came the part that would have shocked his classmates if they could see what he was doing. Instead of beginning construction on a small, simple shelter. Like everyone else, Do-Yun began excavating a foundation large enough for a structure that would be bigger than most family homes back on Earth. His construction robots worked alongside him, digging trenches, pouring reinforced concrete, and installing underground systems that would support something much more complex than a basic survival shelter. The robots could work continuously without getting tired, which meant construction could continue even while Do-Yun slept day one, while Kix the Zephyrian was carefully following his assembly manual and snapping together. Standard metal panels, Do-Yun was installing a foundation system that could support multiple buildings' underground tunnels and defensive walls, day two, while other students were working on basic air recycling systems. Do-Yun began the most ambitious part of his project. He started drilling deep holes to tap into the underground hot springs. His advanced drilling equipment could bore through rock like it was soft dirt. Steam began rising from the holes as superheated water bubbled up from the geothermal system below. The natural hot springs would provide unlimited hot water heating for his entire complex and enough energy to power electrical systems day three, while most students were installing simple food storage and communication equipment. Do-Yun began smelting iron ore from the local deposits. His portable forge could reach temperatures hot enough to melt metal, and his construction robots helped him shape custom beams, brackets, and reinforcement materials. The sound of hammering and machinery echoed across the valley as Do-Yun worked. His grandfather had taught him that good craftsmanship required attention to every detail. Even if no one else would ever see the foundation or the underground systems, they had to be built properly. Meanwhile, across the planet, his classmates were making steady progress on their much simpler projects. Key had completed about 60% of his hexagonal shelter. The metal panels fit together perfectly using the standard Zephyrian design that had been tested on dozens of worlds. His structure would be functional, comfortable, and completely adequate for 7 days of survival. Vorthak the crystalline being had successfully created her energy dome. The shimmering barrier glowed with soft blue light and would protect her from wind, rain, and temperature changes. Her people had been using similar technology for thousands of years, a student from the aquatic world. Narita had built a moisture retention chamber that would keep her gills properly hydrated even in the dry atmosphere of Kepler 442b. The design was elegant and efficient, using the minimum amount of energy and materials needed. But up in orbit, Professor Kylox was beginning to notice something very unusual in his daily progress reports. The monitoring system automatically tracked each student construction activity, energy consumption, and resource usage. Most of the readings were exactly what he expected, small structures using basic power levels and simple materials. Then there were the readings from human student Kim Do-Hyun computer display. Detailed analysis of all student construction projects. The professor commanded from his observation station. Holographic displays filled the air around him showing progress reports from all 24 students. Most showed simple bar charts indicating steady progress toward completion of basic survival. Shelter's Do-Yun display was completely different. The computer showed massive energy consumption complex, thermal signatures indicating industrial-level activity, and a construction footprint that was growing larger every day. Resource usage was still within the allowed parameters, but barely. Computer verify readings for human student Kim Do-Yun professor, Kylox said, waving his tentacles nervously. Readings verified current structure footprint 430 square meters and expanding energy output sufficient for small residential colony resource extraction and processing, indicating advanced manufacturing capabilities. All activities within assigned project parameters. Professor Kylock's tentacles turned bright yellow, which was the color his species displayed when extremely confused. 430 square meters, most student shelters, were 15 square meters at most. What exactly was the human building down there? The computer continued its report. Geothermal tap successfully established underground foundation systems, 90% complete, surface construction beginning tomorrow. Estimated completion time within project deadline. Professor Kylock had been teaching survival engineering for 47 years. He had seen students from hundreds of different species and thousands of different worlds build every conceivable type of shelter. Some were creative, some were efficient, some were beautiful. But he had never seen anything like what the human student appeared to be constructing. Computer project final size and capabilities of human student construction based on current progress. The computer hummed for several seconds before responding. Estimated final structure residential complex, capable of housing 12 to 15 beings. Multiple specialized areas including power generation, water processing, food production, and recreational facilities. Defensive capabilities suitable for long-term settlement. Professor Kylock made a sound that his translator could not process. It was somewhere between amazement and panic down on the planet's surface. Do-hyun had no idea that his professor was having a crisis. He was too busy working on day 3 of what he privately called the foundation phase. He had successfully tapped into 3 separate geothermal vents, which would provide more than enough energy for everything. He wanted to build his smelting operation, was producing high-quality steel beams, and his construction robots had completed the underground infrastructure. Tomorrow, he would begin work on the surface structure itself, and that was when things would really start to look impressive. As the alien sun set behind the mountains, Do-hyun allowed himself a few minutes to rest. He sat on a pile of construction materials, eating a simple dinner while reviewing his progress on his tablet. Everything was going according to plan. Actually, it was going better than planned. The geothermal system was more powerful than expected. The local ore deposits were richer than the surveys had indicated, and his construction robots were working with perfect efficiency. His communication device beeped with an incoming message from Minji. "How is your shelter coming along?" she asked. Her voice sounded tired, but happy, making excellent progress, Do-hyun replied, which was certainly true. Just finished the foundation work and underground systems. Tomorrow I start on the main building. That sounds like you are ahead of schedule, she said. I finished my shelter this morning. It is a nice little dome with climate control and a small garden area, very cozy and comfortable. How big is yours? Going to be. Do-hyun looked around at his construction site. Steam was rising from several geothermal taps. Piles of processed steel beams were arranged in neat rows ready for assembly. The foundation stretched across the valley floor, like the outline of some great building. Big enough, he said simply. After ending the communication, Do-hyun went back to work. There was still plenty to do before he could sleep. His grandfather had always said that the most important part of any construction project was the foundation. If you built that correctly, everything else would be easy. By midnight, he had completed the last of the underground installations. Tomorrow would bring the really fun part, building something on the surface that would make everyone understand what human engineering could accomplish when it was done properly. 3 weeks had passed since Professor Kylock gave the assignment, and the transport ships were finally ready to take students to planet Kepler 442b. The massive cargo ships floated in space above the university station, looking like giant metal whales with glowing engines. Most students had packed very light for the trip, Kix the Zephyrian had brought 17 metal panels, one air processing unit, and some basic tools. His entire supply list fit on half a page. Vorthak the crystalline being needed even less, since her people could create energy shields from their own bodies. She had packed some emergency food and a communication device. And that was all. But Do-Yun cargo manifest was completely different. Very different. Minji sat next to him on the transport ship, reading through his supply list on her tablet. Her eyes got wider with each item she saw. Thermal regulation systems, she read out loud. Hydrodynamic pumps, advanced drilling equipment, portable smelting forge. Do-Hyun, you have packed enough stuff to build a small city. Do-Hyun looked up from his own tablet where he was studying geological survey maps of his assigned location. It's all within the rules, he said calmly. Professor Kylox said we could bring whatever we thought was necessary for survival. Their alien classmates were staring at the massive pile of cargo containers that belonged to Do-Hyun. Each container was labeled with complex technical terms that most students had never heard of before. Some of the equipment looked so advanced that even the senior students were confused about what it might be used for. Kix floated over from his seat using the small propulsion jets that his species had instead of legs. His gills were fluttering nervously as his translator. Device beeped and crackled. Human friend Do-Hyun, why do you carry so much material? My shelter requires only basic construction supplies. What could you possibly need with all these machines? Do-Hyun smiled politely. Different species have different survival needs, he explained. Some beings can create energy shields, others can filter air through their gills. Humans need more tools to stay safe and comfortable. What he did not tell Kix was that he had spent every free moment for 3 weeks learning advanced engineering techniques from the human colony databases. He had studied geothermal energy systems, mining operations, defensive architecture, hydroponics, food production, and even artistic landscaping. His tablet contained more technical information than some university libraries. Minji knew her boyfriend well enough to recognize when he was not telling the whole truth. She leaned closer and whispered in his ear. What are you really planning to build down there? Do-Hyun showed her a new set of blueprints. On his screen, the design had grown even more complex over the past few weeks. What started as a simple fortress had become something that looked like a luxury resort combined with a military base and a research facility. It's still technically a shelter, he whispered back. It just happens to have some extra features for long-term survival and comfort. The transport ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere of Kepler 442b. Students pressed against the small windows to see the planet's surface. Below, the landscape looked harsh and beautiful. At the same time, rocky canyons stretched for kilometers, while strange purple and red plants grew in patches wherever there was enough water. Crystal formations jutted out of cliff faces, glowing faintly in the light of the alien sun. Professor Kylox's voice came through the ship's communication system. Students will be placed at different locations across the southern continent. Each site is approximately 50 kilometers from the others to prevent collaboration. You will have 7 planetary cycles to complete your shelters and demonstrate that they can keep you alive. The professor paused, and his tentacles could be seen wiggling through the transparent command booth. Remember, this is a test of basic survival engineering. Keep your designs simple and functional. Overcomplicated structures often fail when they are needed. Most. Several students nodded in agreement, but Do-Hyun was studying topographical maps of his assigned valley on his tablet. He could see a stream running through the area, rocky outcroppings that would provide good foundation support, and what looked like mineral deposits in the nearby cliffs. His engineering mind was already calculating water flow rates, load bearing requirements, and optimal placement for various structural elements. The ship began dropping off students at their assigned locations. Each student received a small emergency kit with basic food, water purification tablets, and a communication device to call for help if something went wrong. When Minji transport pod was ready for deployment, she grabbed Do-hyun's hand one more time. "Promise me you will not go completely overboard with this project," she said, looking into his dark eyes. "I know. You want to impress everyone, but do not forget that the goal is just to survive." For 7 days, Do-hyun squeezed her hand and smiled. "That depends on how you define going overboard," he replied as her pod detached from the ship and began its descent. To her assigned location, Minji shook her head. She loved Do-hyun's creativity and ambition, but sometimes she worried that he took on projects that were too big, even for his considerable skills. Finally, it was Do-hyun's turn to be deployed. His cargo took up 3 separate transport pods, while he rode in a 4th. The ship computer had to recalculate weight distribution twice to make sure all the equipment would land safely. Professor Kylox floated over to the deployment bay to watch the final student leave. His skin had turned a curious orange color, which meant he was both confused and slightly worried. "Student Kim, are you certain you can manage all this equipment by yourself? Most students work alone, but you have brought enough supplies for a construction team." Do-hyun bowed politely in the human style. "I have experience with construction projects, Professor. My family has a tradition of building things properly the first time." As his pod detached from the ship and began falling toward the planet's surface, Do-hyun looked out the small window at his assigned territory. The valley was perfect for what he had in mind. A stream provided fresh water. Rocky cliffs offered protection from wind and storms. Most importantly, the geological scans showed exactly what he had hoped to find underground. The pod touched down with a soft bump, and the door hissed open. Do-hyun stepped out onto alien soil for the first time. The air tasted slightly metallic, but it was perfectly breathable for humans. The gravity was a bit lighter than Earth standard, which would make moving his heavy equipment much easier around the planet. Other students were already starting work on their shelters. Kix began snapping together his hexagonal metal panels. Following the standard Zephyrian construction manual, Vorthak found a good spot for her energy dome and began the meditation process that would let her create a protective shield. A student from the Ice World Fregata started digging into the ground to build an underground cooling chamber, but Do-hyun did something completely different. He began surveying his valley like a professional engineer. First, he took geological samples from different areas using his portable analysis equipment. The results confirmed what the orbital scans had suggested: rich deposits of iron ore, limestone, and other useful minerals. The stream connected to underground water sources, and most importantly, the entire valley sat above a geothermal system with natural hot springs about 15 meters below the surface. "Perfect," Do-hyun said to himself as he marked important locations on his digital map. He set up his base camp in the center of the valley and began unloading equipment from the 3 cargo pods. Advanced drilling rigs, portable smelting equipment, construction robots that could work continuously, and enough building materials to construct something much larger than a simple survival shelter. As the alien sun set behind the rocky cliffs, Do-hyun was still working by the light of portable floodlights. He had been awake for 18 hours, but he was not tired at all. He was too excited about finally getting to build something amazing. Across the planet, his classmates were settling in for their first night. Most had completed the basic framework of their shelters and would finish construction over the next few days. Their approach was sensible and practical. Build something adequate, get a good grade, and move on with their studies. But Do-hyun had never been satisfied with adequate. When his grandfather had told him stories about building houses in the Korean mountains, the old man had always emphasized one thing: if you are going to build something, build it to last forever. Build it so well that people will still be using it 100 years from now. As he fell asleep in his temporary shelter that first night, Do-hyun dreamed about the structure he was going to create. It would be beautiful and functional, strong enough to last for Decades, but comfortable enough that anyone would be happy to live there. What he did not know was that Professor Kylox was already starting to notice unusual readings from his location. The energy consumption was much higher than expected for a simple shelter, and the construction activity was showing up on orbital sensors as something much more complex than a basic survival building. But Do-hyun would worry about explaining that later. Right now, he had a fortress to build. The morning sun of 3 different stars shone through the massive windows of the Galactic University classroom. Professor Kylox moved his 6 purple tentacles as he floated behind his teaching desk. The alien professor looked like a giant octopus, but with smooth skin that changed colors when he got excited. Right now, his skin was a calm blue, which meant he was in teaching mode. Students from 12 different worlds sat in their special floating chairs. Each species needed different things to breathe and stay comfortable. The Zephyrian student named Kix had gills that needed to stay wet, so tiny water sprays kept misting his neck. The crystalline being called Vorthak didn't need to breathe at all but absorbed energy through the special lights built into her chair. The furry creatures from the ice world Frigata wore cooling suits to keep from overheating in the warm classroom. But in the back row sat 2 humans who looked very normal compared to everyone else. Do-hyun Kim had black hair and dark eyes that seemed to notice everything around him. His girlfriend Minji Park sat next to him taking careful notes on her tablet. She had long black hair that she kept tied back, and she always asked the smartest questions in class. Professor Kylox cleared his throat, which sounded like bubbles popping underwater. His translator device made a beeping sound before his words came out in perfect galactic standard language. Today we will discuss your final project for advanced survival engineering. Class, he announced, waving his tentacles toward the big screen behind him. The assignment is very simple, and I want you all to listen carefully. The screen showed pictures of a harsh-looking planet with brown rocks, red soil, and strange purple plants, growing in patches. The planet looked hot and dry, with deep canyons and tall mountains in the distance. This is planet Kepler, 442b. Professor Kylox continued, your job is to build a basic shelter that can keep 1 person alive for 7 planetary cycles. The planet has breathable air for most species, but the weather can be dangerous. There are sandstorms that last for days. Temperatures drop very low at night and rise very high during the day. Your shelter must protect you from all of these things. Most of the alien students nodded their heads or made whatever gesture their species used to show understanding. They had done projects like this before in their basic classes. Usually, they just built simple dome-shaped buildings with air, recyclers, and food storage. Basic survival was the goal. Nothing more. Kix the Zephyrian was already drawing sketches on his tablet. His people were famous for building efficient hexagonal pods that could be put together quickly. His drawing showed the standard design 6 metal walls, a simple door, and basic life support systems. Inside Vorthak, the crystalline being was thinking about her approach. Her people could create energy shields that formed protective bubbles around them. She would probably build a shimmering dome that would keep out wind and rain while letting in the right amount of light. The students from other worlds were all making similar plans, simple, functional shelters that would do the job and nothing more. That was how most species approached engineering problems. Figure out exactly what you need, then build exactly that, and stop. But Do-hyun was different. He raised his hand high in the air and waited for the professor to notice him. Professor, when you say basic shelter, are there any specific rules about how big it can be, or what materials we can use, or what extra features we might add? Professor Kylox's tentacles wiggled in what his species did instead of laughing. Young human, the goal is survival, not comfort you. Need to build something that keeps you alive. That is all. Nothing fancy is required? Do-hyun nodded slowly, but Minji noticed the small smile that appeared on his face. She had been dating him for 8 months now, and she knew that look. It was the Same expression he had when their physics professor said it was impossible to improve the efficiency of standard fusion reactors. Do-hyun had then spent 3 weeks building a model reactor that was 20% more efficient. The professor continued, explaining the project. Each student would be taken to a different location on the planet. They would be dropped off with basic emergency supplies and communication equipment. Then they would have 7 days to build their shelter and prove it could keep them alive. The locations would be far apart, so students could not help each other. You may bring whatever tools and materials you think you need for survival, Professor Kylox said. But remember, this is a test of your engineering skills, not your ability to pack luxury items. Keep it simple, keep it functional, and keep yourself alive. As students began packing up their things and talking excitedly about their plans, Do-hyun stayed in his seat. He pulled out his personal tablet and started typing, rapidly. His fingers moved so fast across the screen that other students stopped to stare. "What are you looking up?" Minji asked, leaning over to see his screen. "Just some basic information about the planet," Do-hyun replied casually. But his screen showed detailed geological surveys, mineral composition reports, atmospheric analysis data, and underground water source maps. He was reading everything the galactic database had about Kepler 442b. Minji frowned. She knew Do-hyun well enough to recognize when he was planning something big. The last time he had done this much research for a simple assignment, he had ended up redesigning the entire waste recycling system for their dormitory building. Most students were heading for the door now, chattering in their various languages about metal panels and air filters and basic construction techniques. But Do-hyun was still reading and taking notes. Professor Kylox floated over to where the two humans were sitting. His tentacles were now a curious green color, which meant he was interested in something. Student Kim, you seem very focused on research for such a simple project. Do-hyun looked up from his tablet and smiled politely. I just want to make sure I understand the environment properly, Professor. Different planets have different challenges, and I want to be prepared. That is good thinking. The professor agreed. Most students just assume they can use standard designs everywhere. But tell me, what kind of shelter are you planning to build? Something that will keep me safe and comfortable for 7 days. Do-hyun answered, which was technically true, but not the whole truth. Professor Kylox nodded approvingly and floated away to answer questions from other students. But if he had looked more carefully, at Do-hyun's screen he would have seen architectural software loading 3D modeling programs opening and complex mathematical calculations running in the background. As they walked back to their dormitory, Minji grabbed Do-hyun's arm and made him stop in the hallway. "Okay, tell me what you are really planning," she demanded. "I can see that look in your eyes. You are not just building a simple shelter, are you?" Do-hyun grinned and showed her his tablet screen. The display showed a complex architectural blueprint that looked more like a small castle than a survival shelter. There were multiple rooms, underground tunnels, defensive walls, and what appeared to be some kind of power generation system. Do-hyun, this looks like you are planning to build a fortress, she whispered, looking around to make sure no other students could hear them. Technically, it is still a shelter, he said, rotating the 3D model on his screen. It just happens to be a very well-designed shelter with some additional features for comfort and safety. But why, Minji asked. The professor said to keep it simple. Do-hyun closed his tablet and looked at her seriously. My grandfather used to tell me stories about building houses in the mountains back on Earth. He always said that if you are going to build something, you should build it to last. If you are going to solve a problem, you should solve it completely. Why build something that just barely works when you can build something amazing? Minji shook her head, but she was smiling now. She had to admit that Do-hyun's approach to problems was one of the things she loved about him. He never did anything halfway. Just promise me you will not get in trouble with Professor Kylox, she said. Do-hyun took her hand as they continued walking toward their dormitory. The halls were filled with alien students from dozens of worlds, all talking about their simple shelter plans. None of them suspected that the quiet human student was about to show them what the word ambitious really meant. "I promise. I will build exactly what the professor asked for," he said, "a shelter that will keep me alive and safe for 7 days." What he did not mention was that his definition of safe and the professor definition might be very different things. But Minji would find that out soon enough.
The Champions' empire was burning. Across 50 star systems, human-led coalition forces struck at military bases, supply depots, and communication centers. The species that had once cowered before champions might now fought alongside human forces. With desperate courage born from years of oppression, Admiral Hyojin stood in the ruins of what had been the champions' greatest fortress on the Outer Rim. The base that had controlled 12 star systems was now nothing but twisted metal and smoking. Crater's human forces had hit it with precision strikes that destroyed everything of military value, while sparing civilian areas. How did they know exactly where to hit? She asked Colonel Dong Hyun, who surveyed the damage with professional interest. Every target was chosen perfectly. They hit our command centers, our weapon stores, our ship repair facilities, but avoided everything else. The answer was disturbing but undeniable. The humans had been preparing for this assault for months. They had infiltrated champions' territory, studied their bases, and learned every weakness. Human intelligence networks had mapped the entire champions' military structure. Captain Subin joined them, carrying captured human equipment. "Sir, we found this communication device in the wreckage. It's still receiving transmissions from human command. The messages they intercepted revealed the true scope of human planning. This was not a desperate counterattack by a cornered enemy. This was a carefully coordinated campaign that had been planned from the very beginning. Every human defeat had been turned into intelligence. Every retreat had gathered information. Supreme Marshal Tae-young received reports of disasters from across his empire in his private chambers aboard the flagship. His perfect empire was crumbling, and he could not understand how it had happened so quickly. The humans had somehow turned his greatest advantage, his vast territory, against him. "Marshal," a communication officer announced nervously, "we are receiving a transmission from the human fleet. It's Admiral Jiho. Put him through, Tae." Young ordered grimly. Jiho's image appeared on the screen, calm and determined despite the chaos of battle around him. "Marshal Tae-young, I have a message for you, from Earth. The time has come to end this war. You dare speak of ending what you cannot win," Tae-young replied. "Though surrender, we might accept if your terms are reasonable, Ho smiled sadly. "I think you misunderstand, Marshal. We are not offering surrender. We are offering you the same choice you have given so many others. Submit or face destruction." The arrogance was breathtaking. A primitive species demanding the surrender of the greatest military power in galactic history. But as Tae-young looked at the reports flooding in from across his empire, he realized the impossible was happening. The humans were winning. Every champion's strength had become a weakness. Their vast empire was too large to defend completely. Their standardized tactics were predictable. Their reliance on overwhelming force meant they had never learned to adapt when that force was insufficient. Human forces struck with perfect coordination. They appeared where champions' defenses were weakest, hit critical targets, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. They fought like shadows, impossible to pin down but deadly to ignore. Lieutenant Yuna, now commanding a battle group in the outer sectors, brought news that shook the champions' leadership to its core. "Sir, the Altarian resistance has retaken their homeworld. They used human weapons and tactics to defeat our garrison." More reports followed. The Zentari had declared independence. The Corvex Confederacy had joined the Human Alliance. The Deltari Empire was in open rebellion. Against all expectations, human leadership was uniting former enemies into a powerful coalition. Dr. Song-hee, the champion's chief scientist, made a discovery that explained everything about human success. "Sir, I have analyzed their communication patterns. The humans are not just coordinating their own forces. They are sharing all their knowledge with every species that joins them. This was incomprehensible to champions' thinking. They hoarded their military secrets, kept their best weapons for themselves, trusted no one outside their own species. But humans gave away their advantages freely, teaching everyone how to fight more effectively. When the Corvex needed better shields, humans shared their shield technology. When the Altarians wanted more powerful weapons, humans provided the designs. When any species joined the alliance, humans immediately began training their forces in advanced tactics. General Yun Seo had realized something that escaped Champion's understanding. A war could not be won by keeping advantages secret. It could only be won by making your allies as strong as possible. Every species the humans helped became a more effective fighter against the champions. The coalition grew stronger with each victory. Species that had been conquered separately now fought together, sharing resources, knowledge, and tactical expertise. The champions found themselves outnumbered not by one species but by dozens working in perfect coordination. Captain Min Ho brought devastating news to Marshal Tae-young. Sir, our intelligence reports indicate the humans have established a new military academy on liberated Altair. They are training officers from 30 different species in combined arms tactics. The champions' military doctrine was based on species fighting alone against superior force. But humans had created something unprecedented, a galactic military alliance where different species' strengths complemented each other. Altarian speed combined with Corvex shields and human tactics created formations the champions could not counter. The turning point came during the Battle of Kepler Station, the champions' most important supply base. The human coalition attacked with forces from 20 different worlds, using tactics that blended the best of each species. Military tradition: Altarian fighters provided reconnaissance. Corvex heavy cruisers absorbed enemy fire. Centauri bombers struck critical targets, and human command ships coordinated everything with split-second timing. The champions' garrison was overwhelmed by an enemy that fought with unity they had never imagined possible. Admiral Hyo Jin, commanding the defense, realized the battle was lost when her sensors detected the approaching enemy. "Fleet, sir," she reported to Tae-young. "The coalition forces outnumber us 3-1 and they are using combined tactics we have never encountered." "How many humans?" Tae-young asked. "Less than 20% of their total force, the rest are species we conquered years ago. They are fighting for the humans now with human weapons and human training." This was the nightmare scenario Tae-young had feared. The humans had not just defended their own world, they had liberated others and turned champions, former subjects, into enemies. The Empire was being destroyed from within by its own former victims. The Battle of Kepler Station ended in complete champions' defeat. The base that had controlled supply lines for an entire sector was captured along with its entire garrison. Coalition forces celebrated their greatest victory, while champions' forces retreated in disorder. But the most shocking moment came when the coalition fleet reached Kepler Station itself. Instead of destroying it, the humans began converting it into a training facility and supply base for liberated worlds. They were not just winning battles, they were building infrastructure for a new kind of galactic government. President Jae-won addressed the galaxy from the captured station. "Citizens of all worlds, we fight not for conquest but for freedom. The age of tyranny is ending. The age of cooperation has begun. Any world that chooses liberty over oppression will find allies among us." The message reached every corner of champions' territory. Species that had never dared dream of freedom began to hope. Resistance movements that had been crushed years before started organizing again. The champions' empire began to collapse as world after world declared independence. Marshal Tae-young realized his empire was doomed unless he could stop the humans quickly. He gathered every remaining champions' fleet for one final desperate assault on Earth itself. If he could destroy the human homeworld, the coalition would crumble without its leaders. But the humans were ready for this possibility. They had spent months preparing Earth defenses while building their coalition. General Yun Seo had turned the human solar system into the most heavily defended location in galactic history. More importantly, the coalition was no longer dependent on Earth for leadership. Human-trained officers commanded fleets across dozens of star systems. Each liberated world had become a center of resistance capable of independent action. The champions had waited too long to strike at the source of their problems. The humans had already succeeded in their greatest victory. They had taught the galaxy that the champions could be defeated and shown other species how to fight for their Frida Mea's champions' forces prepared for their final desperate assault. They faced not just human defenders but the combined might of an entire galactic alliance. The war had become something far greater than anyone had imagined. A struggle between two completely different ideas about how the galaxy should be governed. The champions believed in rule through strength and fear, but humans had proven that cooperation and shared knowledge could overcome any tyranny. The final battle would determine which philosophy would shape the future of galactic civilization.